At 6:00 in the morning, one of the most expensive private jets in the world was ready for takeoff. The engines were tested, the pilots were waiting, the destination was programmed. There was only one problem: the billionaire who owned it never stepped inside. Hours later, investigators would discover something even stranger: the jet wasn't abandoned. It was prepared for a journey that may have never been meant to happen. Was he running from something? Was someone trying to erase him? Or was the biggest clue hiding inside the aircraft itself? The answer would reveal a secret hidden behind billions of dollars, private meetings, and a man who trusted almost nobody. The story begins with a man known around the world for his incredible success, a billionaire who built an empire from nothing and became famous for living a life most people could only imagine. To the public, he appeared untouchable. He owned luxury homes, controlled powerful companies, and traveled in complete privacy. His schedule was carefully protected. His movements were known only by a small circle of people closest to him. But on one particular morning, something happened that would leave everyone searching for answers. His private aircraft sat on the runway exactly as planned, waiting for its owner to arrive. The crew checked every detail. The cabin was prepared. The documents were ready. Everything looked normal. Except the one person everyone was waiting for never arrived. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. For years, the billionaire had built a reputation for controlling every part of his life. He was the kind of person who rarely made mistakes and rarely allowed others to know his next move. Employees described him as someone who planned months ahead and always had backup options. So when he suddenly disappeared from his usual routine, the people around him immediately noticed. His assistants tried contacting him. Calls went unanswered. Messages remained unread. At first, many believed it was a simple misunderstanding. Maybe he changed his plans. Maybe he wanted privacy. Maybe he had arranged something without telling anyone. But as the hours passed, the situation became harder to explain. The aircraft was still waiting. His team was still waiting. And the mystery surrounding his absence continued to grow. The first questions came from the people closest to him. They wanted to know what happened in the final hours before he vanished from public view. Where had he been? Who had he spoken to? Was there anyone who knew more than they were saying? Investigators began looking into his movements, his business connections, and the private meetings he had recently attended. They discovered that his life was far more complicated than the image shown to the public. Behind the success stories and magazine covers was a world of negotiations, powerful partnerships, and decisions that affected thousands of people. Every billionaire has secrets, but some secrets become impossible to hide when the person at the center of them suddenly disappears. The private jet became one of the most important pieces of the investigation. Inside the aircraft, everything looked untouched. The seat where he usually sat was empty. Personal items remained exactly where they had been left. The luxury cabin that had carried him across continents was now frozen in time, like it was waiting for someone who would never return. Investigators examined every detail because sometimes the smallest things reveal the biggest answers. A forgotten document. A strange message. A conversation recorded before the flight. Any clue could explain why a man with unlimited resources would prepare to leave and then never arrive. As investigators continued searching, they began to uncover a pattern. The billionaire had recently become more careful about who he trusted. Meetings that were once open became private. Information that was once shared with many people was restricted to only a few. Some believed he was protecting his business empire. Others believed he knew something was coming. The question was no longer only where he had gone. The bigger question was whether he left by choice or whether someone else changed his plans. People who worked with him described him as a man who understood risk. He knew that money could create enemies as easily as it created opportunities. Every major decision brought attention from people who wanted access to his influence and power. Over time, he learned to protect himself, to move carefully, and to keep important information close. But even someone with private security, advanced technology, and endless resources could not control every situation. The mystery surrounding his disappearance showed the world that even the most powerful people can become surrounded by unanswered questions. The investigation reached deeper into his personal and professional world. Friends were interviewed. Business partners were questioned. Records were reviewed. Every person connected to him had a different version of who he really was. Some saw him as a brilliant businessman who created opportunities for others. Some saw him as a highly private figure who always kept his next move hidden. But everyone agreed on one thing: he was not someone who would simply vanish without a reason. the aircraft waiting on the runway became a symbol of the mystery itself. It represented a journey that was supposed to happen, a future plan that suddenly stopped. For many people watching the story unfold, the empty seat inside that jet became the biggest question. What could make a person with everything decide not to board? What information could change the plans of someone who had spent decades building an empire? And what happened in the moments between the final preparation and the moment he disappeared? As more details came forward, investigators realized that the truth was connected to a much larger story. It involved wealth, trust, loyalty, and the hidden pressure that comes with extreme success. The world often sees the final result of a billionaire's life: the companies, the properties, the luxury, and the influence. But few people see the private decisions, the difficult choices, and the conflicts that happen away from cameras. This story was not only about a missing man. It was about everything surrounding him, everything he built, and everything he left behind. Years later, the mystery of the waiting jet continued to capture attention because it represented something people could not easily understand. A machine worth millions sat ready for a journey, but the person who owned it was gone. A life filled with power and opportunity suddenly became a story filled with questions. And somewhere inside those unanswered moments was the truth about what really happened to the man who planned to leave, but never entered his own jet. His name was Jonathan Whitmore. To the public, he was the man who turned a small idea into a global empire. His companies stretched across industries, his homes became symbols of success, and his life appeared almost untouchable. But behind the private gates, behind the security teams and carefully controlled public image, Jonathan Whitmore carried a story that few people knew. The question that would haunt everyone was simple: why would a man who had everything prepare a private flight, gather everything he needed, and then disappear before ever stepping onto the plane? Because the final hours of Jonathan Whitmore's life were not just a mystery. They were the beginning of a disappearance that would leave investigators searching for answers. For years, the billionaire had built his life around one simple idea: control. Control over his companies, control over his decisions, control over the future he had spent decades creating. But in the months leading up to the day his private jet waited on the runway, something began to change. People around him started noticing small details, the kind of details that seem meaningless when they happen, but become impossible to ignore after everything falls apart. His schedule became more private, his meetings became more carefully selected. People who once had easy access to him suddenly found themselves kept at a distance. Those around him wondered, was he simply protecting his empire, or was he preparing for something nobody else knew about? Because the billionaire had always been a planner. He believed that every possible problem had a solution. Risk had a backup plan. Threat had to be considered, but this time the people around him sensed something different. This wasn't just business. This felt personal. Behind the walls of luxury homes and private offices, there were conversations nobody outside the inner circle could hear. Nobody could answer. Was one of the world's most successful businessmen suddenly becoming more cautious? Why was he making preparations that seemed unusual? And why did his private jet become such an important part of those plans? Because a private aircraft is more than transportation for someone like him. It represents freedom. It represents escape. It represents the ability to leave everything behind within hours. And that is exactly what made the situation so strange. The billionaire had arranged the flight. The crew was prepared. The aircraft was waiting. Everything was ready. Yet the one person everyone expected to see never arrived. At first, people assumed there had been a simple delay, maybe a change of plans, maybe a last-minute decision. But as the hours passed, concern began replacing confusion. Calls went unanswered, started spreading. Slowly, the people closest to him realized something terrifying. This was not just a missed flight. Something had happened. The billionaire, who always seemed to have a plan, had disappeared before the journey even began. And now investigators would have to uncover what happened in those final hours, because somewhere between the last conversation, the final decision, and the jet waiting alone on the runway, was the answer to one of the biggest mysteries surrounding the billionaire. Why did he prepare to leave, but never enter his jet? But investigators could not follow rumors. They needed proof. They needed to separate facts from assumptions. And the deeper they examined Michael Carter's final days, the more they discovered that the disappearance was not just about a missing flight. It was about a man whose public success had hidden a private world filled with unanswered questions. The mystery surrounding Michael Carter would continue to grow. The private jet remained untouched. His businesses continued operating. His family and employees searched for answers. And the world waited to discover what happened to the billionaire who had everything a person could want, except the one thing: nobody could find him. If you enjoy stories where one decision changes everything, where mysteries unfold piece by piece, and where the truth is never as simple as it first appears, subscribe to Unspoken Stories. More unbelievable mysteries, hidden secrets, and unforgettable stories are coming.